The King of Fighters 2002 Unlimited Match.
Greetings all you amazing individuals who follow this humble channel. Once again, yours truly, the 8-Bit Academic, is here to talk all things retro gaming and random fun facts that my overly obsessive and inquisitive mind manages to dig up when going down the multiple rabbit holes and internet deep dives I embark on, out of a combination of boredom, curiosity, and possible madness. In today's video, I am once again showing off some King of Fighters 2002 gameplay, specifically with yet another one of my mains, much to the frustration of all my friends who I keep beating when playing with her, a pretty well-dressed female character named King, who actually had her first debut in yet another classic SNK title called Art of Fighting, which itself was released way back in 1992. According to some trivia I found on some of the many SNK wiki sites, the reason King dresses in such a masculine manner is because her entire shtick in the very first Art of Fighting game was to appear androgynous, or rather to hide her true sex or gender. According to the dev team at SNK, they initially took inspiration from the pop idol sensation of the late 80s and early 90s, Grace Jones, but were further inspired by a female henchwoman that appears in the 1989 Hong Kong action/crime drama film called China White, the henchwoman being played by Dutch actress and Muay Thai champion Saskia van Rijswijk, who also played the main villain in yet another Hong Kong action film called Iron Angels 3.
Wow, big lady.
Yeah, big lady. Big lady, step on me.
Now, you might be wondering after reading the title to this video, well, okay, what exactly does all this have to do with the King of Fighters franchise being connected to the Hong Kong Triads, or in simpler terms, the Chinese Mafia? Well, that's a very good question, and I'll give you a straight answer. Absolutely nothing at all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Seriously though, it actually does have very little connection with them. It was mostly just me using a clickbait title again to get your attention.
Oh my fucking...
Fuck out of here! TV talking shit, nigga, fuck that.
But before you try and jump me through the screen, let's first take a look at the aforementioned character of King, who is the main feature of today's gaming showcase. Remember how I said just now that the dev team at SNK took inspiration from a female henchwoman character that appeared in the 1989 Hong Kong movie China White? Well, if you ever watched the film, which mind you is fully available here on YouTube, round about the very last scene there's a fight sequence where you can see just how blatant that inspiration was. How they basically just copied Saskia van Rijswijk's tough lady boss character's likeness to the T, but possibly just giving her a slightly different hairdo, with even her eventual beatdown by one of the film's protagonists being duplicated in the Art of Fighting game as well. So there's no question about it, King from KOF and Art of Fighting is definitely based off this character, or perhaps even fully based off this 80s female Muay Thai champion, Saskia van Rijswijk, who basically played more or less the same character in almost every movie she was in. But now, what about that connection to the Hong Kong Triads? Well, here's the part where we jump down the rabbit hole together, my dear viewers. You see, the movie China White was actually produced by members of the Hong Kong Triads, who back in the 1980s and early 1990s had quite a stranglehold on the entertainment industry in the small island used to be British colony nation. So naturally, when Saskia got the role of the snappily dressed, super tomboyish, androgynous henchwoman, she was obviously cast by film directors and producers who had triad affiliations. Now, earlier in the very beginning of this YouTube channel, I had made a video about how Jackie Chan had trouble with the triads as well, linked down below in my pinned comment and at the end of the video. And while doing the research for that video, I came across a story about how he wasn't the only Chinese actor who had some near-death run-ins with this notorious crime syndicate, who by this point had already expanded into a global criminal empire with various tongs and gangs across the world in both the East and the West. Another actor named Andy Lau, who you may recognize from the Matt Damon fantasy epic called The Great Wall, also had some serious life-threatening encounters with the Chinese Triads when he was approached at gunpoint and forced to star in this late 1980s crime thriller called China White, which itself is a story about two brothers who run a Tong or Triad gang which operates in Amsterdam as they compete against the Italian Mafia and other rival Triad gangs or Tongs. Even mainland Chinese actors like Jet Li had run-ins with the Triads when his manager Choi Chi-ming or Jim Choi was shot outside his office in 1992. In Hong Kong, supposedly Choi also had ties to the movie China White as a producer, and it turns out was a member of the 14K Triads, one of the many crime syndicates that exist in East Asia. The assassination may have been due to the fact that Jim Choi refused to loan Jet Li to star in another film which was also being produced by a rival Triad gang. Then there is also the story of Carina Lau, wife of Tony Leung, who you may know from Marvel's Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings, who in the late 80s was kidnapped and possibly sexually assaulted by Triads when she refused to star in a film being produced by them, with some rumors at the time speculating that the film in question may have also been China White. Damn, it seems like a lot of sketchy shit was related to this one specific movie. But to be quite honest, it definitely wasn't the only movie that had ties to the Triads, with many articles and interviews with Hong Kong-based actors at the time expressing major concern with just how much of a chokehold the various Triad organizations had on the southern Chinese entertainment industry in the 1980s, and how many of them feared for their lives if they ever refused a role or a gig from either a director, casting agent or producer who was affiliated with these Chinese crime syndicates, with some Triad members even going on to become massive superstars in their own right, like Michael Chan Y-Man, but we will talk more about him later on.
If you don't want to give me money, I will show you with your last bond. Took him to shower or to the hot shower. I like to show you there I want money. Or to the oven, micro oven. I put him like this to the oven. Then you see I want money.
Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the history of the Triads for this one, since I feel like a better game to partner with that topic would either be Sleeping Dogs or The First True Crime, and currently I lack both the space on my computer since I have too many games and the emulators to play either of those. So for now, I'll just cover their history briefly but focus more on their massive cultural impact on East Asian entertainment in general, especially during the 1970s, 1980s and early 1990s, before the handover of Hong Kong back to mainland China, plus a focus on the previously mentioned Hong Kong action star Michael Chan, since his story is actually quite an interesting one that portrays this once deep connection between movies and organized crime quite bluntly.
Wait! You could die. At least tell me your name.
Like a somebody, fuck you, bitch!
So just to touch briefly on the history of the Triads, it seems that many of them have their roots in secret societies, cults and martial clubs that date all the way back to the 18th and 19th centuries, with the initial intention behind them being to secretly oppose and eventually overthrow the Qing dynasty, which was established by the Manchu people after they conquered China in 1645. So these early secret societies seem to be quite nationalistic and for the most part likely believed in Han ethnic superiority, since the Han people make up majority of China's population. Secret societies like the Hongmen or Tiandihuai originated in the early days of the Manchu conquest into China. The Hongmen themselves were inspired by the many White Lotus societies, who by any means necessary opposed the Manchus and their takeover of China, since by their very nature, these White Lotus groups were pretty hardcore uber-patriots and loyalists of the previous Han-led Ming dynasty, with many of them having their roots in Chinese folk religions like Taoism and Chan Buddhism. There even exists a legend that the Tiandihuai may have had its start at the Shaolin Temple, but this seems to have simply been an attempt at better marketing to attract more followers to their cause, since the Shaolin monks were known to even back then provide sanctuary to rebel groups, attracting the ire of the Qing imperial court, who would constantly harass and bully the temple, leading to its eventual decline throughout the Qing dynasty. In reality though, the Tiandihuai or Heaven and Earth Society was founded around the year 1961 by a man named Zheng Kai in Fujian province, starting off as a mutual aid brotherhood or fraternity, with its initial goal being to provide mutual aid, lodging and financial support for marginalized migrants and poor people, but eventually growing to be one of the leading organizations who would constantly attempt to rebel against the Manchu-ruled Qing Empire, adopting an extremely patriotic and nationalistic stance against them like their predecessors, the White Lotus Society. Many revolts and uprisings were caused directly by the Tiandihuai throughout the remainder of the 1800s, such as the Red Turban Rebellion, the Small Sword Society Rebellion, and the Dai Chao Chuen Incident, and they amongst other groups like the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which was led by the alleged Chinese brother of Jesus Christ, Hong Shui Chuan, and the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists or Boxer Rebels would continue to cause absolute chaos across China for the latter half of the 19th and early 20th centuries, with the dual intention of overthrowing the Qing and getting rid of all foreigners. But whereas both the Taipings and the Boxers were eventually crushed, the Heaven and Earth Society continued to endure right into the early 1900s, where they would support the efforts of Chinese revolutionary leaders like Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and eventually help him to form his own secret society called the Tongmenghui, the Kuomintang Party, and the Nationalist Revolutionary Army, which in turn led to the final attempt at overthrowing the Qing, which would prove to be successful in the 1911 Xinhai Revolution. After this, however, it seems like most of these secret societies, like the Tiandihuai, would end up disappearing into obscurity, since their centuries-long goal of overthrowing the Manchu-led Qing dynasty was over. However, many of them would end up turning to organized crime and essentially become gangs that profited heavily off the illegal opium trade during the largely unstable periods that followed after the overthrow of the Qing dynasty.
It's free real estate.
The Kuomintang Party, which itself was based in southern China, developed a pretty close relationship with these triad gangs, as they would often enlist them to carry out political assassinations and violent suppression of any form of dissent in all KMT-controlled territories, such as when General Chiang Kai-shek himself enlisted the aid of the Green Gang, led by infamous crime boss Du Yusheng, to undertake the Shanghai Massacre against members of the Chinese Communist Party in the 1920s. Eventually though, the Chinese Civil War, which ended in 1949, would see the Communists take control of mainland China, and the nationalists under the KMT flee to Taiwan, and when Mao Zedong of the CCP came to power, he cracked down hard on organized crime in the mainland, which resulted in many of these triad groups fleeing to Hong Kong, where they would continue their illicit activities with dealings in the drug trade, prostitution, gambling, human trafficking and extortion, which was a lot easier for them since British colonial rule in Hong Kong wasn't as strict as the communist dictatorship of mainland China. So the triads were able to continue their illegal dealings without much hassle from the Hong Kong police, since it was so easy for them to be bribed.
Corruption is not bad. Corruption is only bad if I'm not involved.
Yes.
But if I'm part of that corruption, I'll defend it.
Fast forward to the 1970s, when Bruce Lee would become a global martial arts sensation, and the entire world would be caught in the iron grip of the Kung Fu movie craze. Of course, the various triad organizations would see this as a golden opportunity to make a shit ton of money, and so many of them would begin to get quite deeply involved in the film industry. In fact, the director of Bruce Lee's first two big screen pictures, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, was himself affiliated with the Sun Yi-on Triads. His name was Lo Wei, and he is to this day regarded as one of the most influential movie directors of all time in Hong Kong cinema. He is also the guy who tried to bully Jackie Chan into staying under contract with him by having the Sun Yi-on threaten the upcoming Kung Fu star. When Jackie wanted to leave due to the absolute trash he was forced to star in, which were mostly just knockoff Bruce Lee movies like New Fist of Fury. Another fairly famous Chinese action star at the time was Jimmy Wang Yu, who supposedly was a member of a Taiwanese triad organization called the Bamboo Union, and who was the one to help Jackie finally escape his contract with Lo Wei. The late 1970s and 1980s saw the Hong Kong-based triads like the Sun Yi-on and the 14K, who are both bitter rivals, really begin to involve themselves more and more in the growing movie industry within the former British colony. The now 77-year-old Charles Heung, who started two production companies called Wins Entertainment and China Star Entertainment Group back in the day, has been linked to the Sun Yi-on, which is considered to be the largest triad organization operating out of East Asia, and specifically Hong Kong. Allegedly, he is the son of Heung Chin, who founded the Sun Yi-on back in 1919, and his older brother Jimmy Heung was also thought to at one point be the leader or mountain master in triad terms of the Sun Yi-on, but I was unable to find anything outside of a Wikipedia article that confirms this. In the 1980s as well, the triads began to make more films about themselves and their lifestyle, movies which centered on storylines and protagonists that were in some way involved with the triads or that perhaps featured them were the hot trend at the time. Even in cases where a director had a clear real resentment towards them and portrayed them as the most degenerate villains of all time were quite popular. The triads themselves didn't care how they were portrayed on screen, as long as there was money to be made. So the 1980s and early to mid-1990s saw quite a number of films that seemed to glamorize the Chinese gangster lifestyle, with characters that were clearly triads rocking their sweet Armani suits and taking down their enemies and rivals with their fully loaded Beretta pistols, as they fought to preserve their honor and uphold their own twisted sense of justice, all while expressing sentimental brotherhood and loyalty among the homies, such as in the many heroic bloodshed or gun fu movies made by director John Woo. The Killer and A Better Tomorrow films being some really good examples of this, as well as Ringo Lam's City on Fire. But along with this newfound success in making movies, even absolutely shitty ones, there came a lot of violence, intimidation, exploitation and corruption. Take for instance the case I mentioned earlier, where Jet Li's manager, Jim Choi, was assassinated by rival Triads, which many saw as karma, since Choi himself used the threat of violence to force many big-name stars like Andy Lau to star in his own productions. Safe to say though that by the early 90s, the Triads had already established quite a firm hold on the Hong Kong entertainment industry, and they both competed quite violently for it as well as relished in its international success, from which they would rake in quite a lot of cold hard cash. Aside from famous individuals like Lo Wei, Jimmy Wang Yu and Charles Heung, other Triad members would also seek out the silver screen limelight. One such person would be Michael Chan Wai Man, who you may recognize from Jackie Chan's Project A Part 2, which was released in 1987. Michael Chan was born in the year 1943 in Hong Kong's New Territories and would eventually enter the Hong Kong police force as a correctional officer in the local prison system. It was here where he would come into contact with many of the most dangerous members of the criminal underworld and begin to form close connections with the Triads. Seeing how much money was to be made in being a gangster compared to being a police officer, he decided to join the second largest criminal syndicate in Hong Kong, called the 14K Triads, which itself had its start in the year 1945 as an anti-communist action group for the Kuomintang Nationalist Party. After the end of the Chinese Civil War and the communist takeover of mainland China, the 14K fled to British Hong Kong and became heavily involved in the drug trade, specifically in the trafficking of opium and heroin, which to this day is their main source of income, with them often competing quite violently against the Sun Yee-on, who are their main rivals.
香港人除咗你有學識之外，大部分都係喺大陸偷渡嚟香港嘅，多數都係冇咩知識水準嘅。嗰年代呢，我哋香港叫百花齊放，就最黑暗嘅時代，最多舞廳夜總會、販毒、賣搖頭丸、開賭檔嗰個年代。因為嗰個年代嗰啲人個知識水準低，你入咗黑社會，有一班人扶持你，變咗揾錢容易啦，所以造成好多咧人都入黑社會啦。都有黑社會，但係我今日入黑社會唔係壞事，我就比佢哋仲早啲。我今年68歲，我行走江湖嗰陣時咧係16歲，所以我係屬於元老級嘅。60、70年代，警只係匪，匪只係警，大家都合埋一齊揾錢㗎啦。
The name 14K supposedly stems from their former ties to the KMT, but there are also other sources that state the number 14 stands for the street number of their former headquarters and that the K stands for Kowloon City. Due to his connections to the 14K, he was eventually suspended from the Hong Kong police and decided to become a full-fledged triad instead, since crime seemed to pay a lot more.
The secret ingredient is crime.
Thus, in the very beginning, he started off as a red pole, which in triad lingo meant he was an enforcer or fighter, meaning that he was part of the group within his respective gang that did a lot of the dirty work, beating up or sometimes even killing rival triads and running protection rackets in 14K territories, where he would go and collect money from local business owners who were under the so-called jurisdiction of the 14K, and those that didn't pay up Well, best believe that Michael Chan and his fellow Red Poles would either harass, intimidate, or sometimes beat the ever-living crap out of anyone who withheld the cash which was owed to them for protection. In a number of interviews, which you can watch online, Chan admitted that he rose to the ranks of eventually becoming the second in command of the 14K and a very close confidant of the head of the gang. He ran nightclubs and brothels, engaged in drug trafficking, and even had a professional kickboxing record for some time in the 1970s as well, and eventually went on to become a fairly well-known movie star in his own right, being close friends with Bruce Lee and acting in quite a few of Jackie Chan's early films, as well as a whole host of other martial arts movies, many of which he would often play the role of a gangster, which I bet wasn't too difficult for him to do at all, since he actually was that guy in real life. Nowadays, Michael Chan claims he is no longer affiliated with the 14K Triads, and has, at least according to him, retired from that life, and nowadays seems to be enjoying his old age. Though there are some who beg to differ, and many believe that even now in his early 80s, with his ailing health, Old Man Chan still has ties to the Hong Kong Triads. Oh, and there does also exist an interview on YouTube where back in the 90s, he supposedly slapped Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, across the face for refusing to star in a Japanese production about the actor's late father. Brandon didn't want to be typecast as the son of Bruce Lee or live in his father's shadow, but the old Triad saw this as an insult to his father's legacy, since he and Bruce were friends in the early 1970s, and as a result, decided to smack the boy upside the head to teach him some manners.
佢拍動作嘅要學佢老豆。呢啲要學佢老豆。並且呢咧就好鬼串。呢個人咧真係我好討厭佢，俾我打咗一巴。係嘛？係啊，嚇翻嚟啊，同我傾偈，我同阿米奇嘅有邊個啊？我當一巴。第一，佢話你以後稱呼我叫 Brandon Lee， 唔好話李小龍個仔。 唔好下提李小龍個仔。Bruce Lee， Brandon Lee， 屌個老母激撚到。咁你佢一直啊，應該要冚佢啦。我李小龍係你老豆嚟㗎，你個身行緊李小龍嘅血液。
These days, despite still being very much active in the East, for the most part, the Triads seem to be keeping a low profile, and it has been this way ever since the handover of Hong Kong to mainland China, putting Hong Kong under the control of the CCP, despite the One Country, Two Systems agreement, and due to the government being the biggest gang of them all, with way more money, resources and guns, it seems like the Triads, for fear of being erased completely, have started to play a lot nicer. I'm not sure if they still have ties to the entertainment industry though in Hong Kong or even mainland China, but they probably do still engage in other illegal activities like drug smuggling, human trafficking, prostitution, gambling, counterfeiting, bootleg or knockoff goods, and running nightclubs. Though since the 2010s, there seems to be a far more concerning trend among the Triads, in that they sometimes serve as muscle for the CCP, especially when it comes to dealing with dissent or protest in Hong Kong, since the Two Systems, which was initiated in 1997 after the handover, prevents the mainland government from getting directly involved in local affairs, and this is no more evident than during the 2019 Hong Kong protests, where citizens of this island nation engaged in mass demonstrations against a new bill that could see criminals and potential political prisoners or activists being arrested and extradited to the mainland for prosecution. The reason for the protest was because Hong Kongers, who had lived under a democratic system since British colonial times with regular elections, felt that this was yet another attempt at the CCP to extend its control over the island, and erode the rights and freedoms which they feel goes directly against the one country, two systems agreement. Now, during these demonstrations in 2019, many eyewitnesses claimed to see large groups of armed thugs wearing masks that would attack and sometimes even kidnap protesters, with many believing that these mysterious assailants were members of both the 14K and Sun Yee-on Triads that were hired to violently suppress the anti-extradition bill protests. So it seems where once the Triads were associated with secret societies that fought to overthrow corrupt governments, they themselves eventually became corrupt, greedy and decadent, and now sell themselves to the highest paying customer, in this case the Chinese Communist Party, and I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if they are also used in the exact same way the Chinese nationalists or Kuomintang Party used them back in the mid-20th century to assassinate political rivals, quell dissent, and enforce the political will of their government benefactors. And that brings us to the end of yet another 8-bit academic deep dive into all things interesting and fascinating. I sincerely hope you all enjoyed today's episode, dear viewers, and if you haven't already, maybe consider subscribing to this channel for more of this type of content. All likes and comments are very much appreciated as well. Until next time, see ya!
I'm not running anywhere. Is something chasing me?
Unbelievable.
Oh, get over it. You don't care.
It's the type of thing, man. You're gonna be psyched after you're done with it. Oh my God, dude.